Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition. We turned out a poem 683, The Soul Unto Itself. Now can we just point out really quickly what we've already said. The word soul ends up in 67 different poems of Emily's, and it appears over 141 times in the Johnson edition. Also, can we just hear the first line of this poem, The Soul Unto Itself, and remind ourselves that Emily spent most of her adult life alone, or if we will, kind of kept away from most society. Some will call her a recluse, some will call her agoraphobic. We haven't really used those terms because this is such a conscious decision and everyone's kind of in on the arrangement, but she spent a lot of time alone. Can we say Emily spent a lot of time unto herself? And in that regards, we're going to look at a poem like this very closely. Well, we also think about the religious background that Emily Dickinson was raised in, where she was taught that there was a watching deity, the eye in the sky, as the Egyptians referred to it, always paying attention to what the humans on the planet are doing. And of course, this is a very ancient idea. Now, for us to read this poem, we got to go back in our study, and we're going to look at some poems. Do you guys remember when we did 594, the battle fought between the soul and no man is the one of all the battles prevalent, by far the greater one. No news of it is abroad, no news of it is had abroad. Its bodiless campaign establishes and terminates invisible, unknown. Nor history recorded as legions of a night. The sunrise scatters, these endure, enact, and terminate. You guys will maybe remember when we did 642, and she said it this way: me from myself to banish, had I art, impregnable my fortress unto all heart. But since myself assault me, how have I peace except by subjugating consciousness? And since we're mutual monarch, how this be except by abdication, me of me? You'll remember that when we did 674, she said it this way: the soul that hath a guest doth seldom go abroad. Diviner crowd at home obliterate the need, and courtesy forbid a host departure when upon himself be visiting the emperor of men. And then just a couple of poems back, do you guys remember when we did 670? One need not be a chamber to be haunted. One need not be a house. The brain has corridors surpassing material place. Far safer of a midnight meeting external ghost than its interior confronting that cooler host. Far safer through an abbey gallop, the stones a chase, the unarmed one's a self encounter in lonesome place. Oneself behind ourself. Concealed should startle most, assassin hid in our apartment be horror's least. The body borrows a revolver, he bolts the door, or looking a superior specter, or more. Now our assumption is that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you worked through our set of introductory comments, as well as we were just referencing, we've read now all of the poems up to 682. We just finished with 682, To It Ease a Butterfly. Now, in this poem, we've got the soul divided into the chooser and the judge. And of course, the judge can be kind of like a spy of a kind, the friend of the chooser, almost like one that's always analyzing or looking. Now, in letter 942 of 1884, Emily to her niece Martha wrote, quote, "Be true to yourself, Maddie, and I shall be prouder of you than I am, which would be unbecoming," end quote. Now here we have another comparison poem as well going on. And this poem is anthologized quite regularly, I think, because it speaks so well of Emily's understood tension. What's happening in the soul or the mind of a human being? She says it this way: the soul unto itself is an imperial friend, or the most agonizing spy an enemy could send. Secure against its own, no treason it can fear. Itself, its sovereign of itself, the soul should stand in awe. Now, the word awe is used in 21 of her poems, and it's fascinating when she uses it because it's almost as if she is always referencing some sense of worship. when she uses this word. Notice we begin again with the soul. And I want you to pay attention to all the S sounds of this poem. It's quite remarkable. The soul unto itself, she says, when left alone, is an imperial friend. In other words, pals. In other words, when we spend enough time alone, we can't help but think, of course, of Emily's contemporary Thoreau, who went to the woods. Why? Because he said he wished to live, what did he say, deliberately and to front only the essential facts of life, right? This idea of, if you can spend enough time alone, and we've given full lectures on all of the Walden passages at learnstrong.net as well, for those of you interested to run that to ground. You'll remember, though, that the argument that was made by Thoreau and by many, many others who have spent time alone is that if you spend time alone, you can actually become a friend. But notice it's not a friend, it's an imperial friend. And in this regards, notice we're going to join that to the sovereign. In other words, there seems to be almost like a tension between an understanding of deity and this imperial friend, this soul that can be unto itself. Or, the key word of the poem, right? The soul can be the most agonizing spy. We'll see this word only used one other time when we get to 1076 near the end of our study, and she'll play the game this way: just once, oh, least request, could adamant refuse so small a grace, so scanty put such agonizing terms? Would not a god of flint be conscious of a sigh as down his heaven dropped remote? Just once, sweet deity. This idea of agonizing, the only two times that she uses it in her poetry, seems to involve some tension with deity. Notice she says it here: the soul can be an agonizing spy, dash, an enemy could send. In other words, we've all had this experience of the conscience. Of course, we think about our understanding from Disney and Pinocchio and the film, and of course Jiminy Cricket, the conscience, that's there to speak directly to us, to tell us something we shouldn't do. In other words, what she's saying, it's sometimes in our life, our soul, our mind, our consciousness can be a friend, an imperial friend, and other times not so much. In fact, a spy who looks in on us. Notice spy capitalized. Then she'll say it: secure against its own. Again, we go from unto itself to own. No treason it, the soul, can fear. In other words, if you are secure to yourself, you needn't fear. It's possible that Polonius's line to Laertes in Hamlet, Act 1, Scene 3, you'll recall, this above all, to thine own self be true, and it follows as the night the day. Thou canst not then be false to any man. Of course, Polonius ironically breaks that line over and over again. But notice, secure unto its own, no treason it can fear. Itself, its sovereign, notice the uses of the dash here, of itself, the soul should stand in awe. I think should might be the key word of this poem, in that she's making the argument that we should be able, not that we always are able, but we should be able to be comfortable with ourselves and not to see our consciousness as somehow a spy upon us, that which makes us always constantly checking and double checking ourselves. We'll get to Freud in a little bit. Now, when we do 753, we'll come back to this study one more time, and she'll say it this way in 753. My soul accused me, and I quailed, as tongues of diamond and reviled. All else accused me, and I smiled. My soul that morning was my friend. Her favor is the best disdain toward artifice of time or men, but a disdain toward lighter bear, a finger of enameled fire. It's a brilliant poem. We'll come back to it. When we hit that poem, we'll remember this study. And then near the very end of our study, when we come to 1242, we'll come back to this poem again at 1242, and this is how she says it there: to flee from memory, had we the wings, many would fly, inured to slower things. Birds with surprise would scan the cowering van of men escaping from the mind of man. This idea of being able to get away. One scholar at 2A has said it this way: autonomy also has the sinister potential of ultimate self-betrayal, end quote. I think that her point here is that the issue is not with making choices. I think Emily again and again seems to prove this, and this will sound very much like our study of Thoreau when we talked about energy conservation model. It isn't the question of whether you will make a choice. We make choices all the time. The question is, can you live with the choices that you make? Or are you always doubting yourself and, oh, if only I hadn't done that, then these things wouldn't be happening. In other words, can one be secure, right, in one's choices? At 2B, I love all the S sounds of this poem. And again, we've mentioned poem 753 that we looked at already. I'd like to think, though, about the power of reading Freud's 1923 offering, The Ego and the Id, in which he plays a very similar game. And of course, Freud borrowing heavily from Plato's understanding of the tripartite soul as understood from our study of Republic, especially 8-9, right? And we've given full lectures at learnstrong.net. Finally, at 3B, what was a time when you had to make a very hard choice and then you had to live with the consequences of that? Maybe for some of you it was the promise you made to yourself to read all these poems of Emily's, which is no small feat. Thank you.